Awesome. Well, welcome back, everybody, to another installment of the Lady Leader series, which is, of course, not just for ladies. And you can see that by having Addison and Jake on here. So, um, today we're going to be discussing a topic that I think all of us can say we hear about weekly, at least, right? I think we can all attest, which is the ins and outs of team bonuses and incentives. And before I dive in, just in case there's somebody listening who doesn't know who you all are, Addison, I'm going to let you start with you. Just do your brief little intro.
Yeah, so Addison Killeen, I've got one dental practice here in Lincoln, Nebraska, with coming on 5 doctors now, joining soon, and I've written a couple of the DSN manuals, like operations manual, startup manual, I, li- 9 books. Okay, so
Just,
and yeah, so I like to write in my spare time.
yeah, you do. It's very true. Jake Conway, who are you?
Jake Conway, owner of Customer Practice Analytics. Been with Dental Success Institute since fruition back in 2012. Ashley and we go way back. All of us go way back. So yeah, I'm the numbers guy. I'm the numbers guy. I won't be saying much, but hopefully I can contribute something here.
Ashley Hirschfeld.
I am, yeah, you guys know me, COO at Dental Success Network and the right hand to Dr. Summer Catmull on these Lady Leader series.
Yes. Well, and just real quick to do a quick plug, just because she texted me about this. Also, if you're looking to find some sort of personal assistant to help you do a lot of things, she finds incredible ones. She found 3 of mine, and I still love them all. So,
Oh,
just
thank
as a
you.
little, just a little side plug as well. So, well, thank you guys, and I'm grateful that you guys made the time to be here. I do want to say before we dive into the whole bonus conversation, I do tend to try to be pragmatic about it, agnostic in the sense that there really isn't, in my opinion, necessarily a right way to do it. The other thing that I will say is you don't have to do anything. I know sometimes we feel compelled that other people are doing it, so we should, or we read about it, so we think, well, if they're doing it, I have to do it. I do love to kind of give the disclaimer, the caveat that there really isn't a right way. You don't have to do anything, but today, what I hope to do is just bring light to a subject, giving pros, cons, ideas, ways that we've seen in all of our years as maybe more successful, less successful, things like that. So I'll dive in just by saying, I know that this can be a little bit of a spicy conversation. I know people get real opinionated on it. It's kind of like occlusion, I say, Dawson and Pankey versus LVI, and people can get really heated. And I usually find my way out of those conversations. But bonus structures and incentives can be kind of like that. So, you know, I'm going to start with what are some of the things when we're all talking to doctors and offices, what are we hearing doctors wrestling with? The one that I hear is the team's asking for it. They're seeing other people getting it on social media pages. People are talking about incentive systems. That's one that I hear often. Addison, what about you?
I mean, I've tried it before, and sometimes it shoots me or shot me in the foot. Just led to some negative incentives for folks. But I see a lot of, and I hear a lot of it that groupthink. They think, oh, if corporate DSOs are doing it and my buddies down the street are doing it, then I should be doing something. And that's, yeah, like you said, I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's also yeah, like you said, there's a million ways to skin the cat or solve this problem, and not every one of these, like if your problem is something, you got to find the right solution for it, and that could be a team bonus, or that could be some other things that are similar but maybe a different flavor. So,
I couldn't agree more. It's not a blanket prescription to
mhm.
solve all ills. But Ashley, what about you? What do you hear from people who are asking? What are some of the common things they're saying?
I think there's a lot of trepidation, of course, because I think like we were like, and I know we'll get into like this can go super well or it can go super wrong. So, that's why I always think it's a good thing, when people are at least asking these questions instead of and that's the beauty of Dental Success Network, right? You can have these conversations with people who have been there, done that before, learn from their mistakes, and maybe decide this isn't for you or this is for you. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the biggest thing is like the I'm on the line, what do I do type thing. And I mean, you open the podcast. I've been on podcast mode, the webinar with that, but that's kind of I am glad when people consider other sources, I guess, and not just dive in.
For sure. Yep. They'll at least take some time to think about it instead of doing, like I said, what somebody else is doing for sure. Jake, what about you? What do you hear when you take calls from offices when it comes to bonuses?
So I usually hear the source, like the reason behind it, usually comes from two different places. Well, I guess a third with the whole like my buddies doing it down the street. But usually I hear I want to institute it to retain people, keep them sticky, keep them on payroll, or to try to motivate them to do more. To kind of what Addison brought up, to offset, you know, uh, profitability issues or fixed cost issues. So I see that those two usually the reasons why. And before I guess before going any further, I'll make my opinion known early on. I don't believe in them. I've just seen them so many times fail to what Addison brought up. Because of those two reasons to motivate or to keep people sticky, a lot of times that loses all of its impact very early on. And then the doctor ends up building resentment on the back end. So that's usually what I see. To Summer's point, there's no right or wrong answer. That's just the information that I've seen over the years.
Do you have any idea, just off the cuff, do you have any idea, Jake, like when you're talking to offices or any of us actually, what are the percentages of bonuses that you've seen implemented and say 1, 2 years later, they're still doing that bonus, feeling great about it, versus how many of you seen need to be dismantled? Does anybody have some sense of statistic around it?
I'd say less than 10% have one that had one, or they've tried to restructure it and reframe it in a way that eliminates the frustrations the original bonus plan created. That's what I've seen. I'm sure Addison, Ashley, you guys have seen a ton of offices too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a lot of folks when they start talking to us or they use custom practice analytics or they join DSN and they've maybe come from another consultancy that has had, some groups teach a dogmatic approach to team bonuses. And they get themselves locked into a bonus structure that just has some really bad incentives that are not tied to the important things like profitability or, that, things are going in a positive direction. So that's kind of what I see is probably a very low percentage keep a plan in place for a long term, for the long term. I would say, yeah, maybe 10 to 20%. And I think we'll talk about some of those plans that are actually truly building longevity. And I think you got to build it into this is how we do things. Like it's not oh, I'm going to try to hit a new level of production or I'm like, we're going to make it a goal. It's just, no, this is just how we do things and build it more as not necessarily a bonus, but just this is our complete compensation structure.
Yeah, for sure. Ashley, do you have any idea what you see with offices? Is it similar to what Jake and Addison just said? Pretty low percentage? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, and so what I will say is, okay, before you do decide to do a bonus system, I think we can all agree, obviously it's at your discretion. There's a million ways to do it. But what are some of the things that we need to think about? And I tell people, like, I'm like you, Ashley, that I really like it when somebody will just stop to actually even think to themselves, okay, what are the metrics that need to be there? Is it sustainable? Is it clear and simple? And then what happens if type scenarios? What happens if 1 year from now COVID hits? What happens if 6 months from now I break my arm and have to put it, whatever it may be? I like when those things are built in. But for all of you, no matter where you stand on this, what are some of the things to start thinking about? We won't dig in quite yet to the true metrics, but what are some things to be thinking about high level before you start putting things into place?
In my mind, the big questions are, do you treat different groups of employees differently? Whether that's hygienist, front office, treatment coordinator, office manager, that sort of thing, leadership, peons, you know. I mean, that's one philosophical question that you need to answer and feel good about it. The other is, are you basing it on things that truly move the needle about what you care about? Um, and most of the time, I think the number that comes down for most of us business owners is profit. Is it truly leading to more profit? Um, I don't know, Jake and Ashley, what other things am I missing there?
Well, we had a comment here too come in, it's like about a bonus system is kind of tool, like as you're getting everything smoothed out towards the end, so you want to make sure your culture and your, systems and the basics are in place first before ever considering this system, in my opinion. And especially if you don't have a good team culture and you have, like you said, Addison, them people there for the right reasons and you're doing things for the right reasons, a bonus system isn't going to make things better. It'll just make things worse, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think we can definitely all attest to that. But yeah, I think there's so many things to think through before you actually start putting one into place. And I do think that they do need to be to some degree catered to exactly who you have in the office, because your people, your plan and your vision better than anyone else. Nobody else knows that but you. And like I said, if it's not sustainable, clear, simple, you haven't thought through some of the things you guys just discussed, I think that's when we can get ourselves into hot water. And which was I just jumped into something because everybody else was doing it. And much like everyone else, I quickly realized, it didn't quite work. So it's not going, you don't want to throw more money at a consistent problem that is a people problem and not a system problem. More money will never solve a people problem. It doesn't matter. Incentivizing the wrong people will just make the wrong people more entitled and stay wrong, be a wrong culture fit. So I think we can all attest to that. But I do want to dive in. Jake, obviously you've stated you're not a huge fan of them. You're not a huge fan of any kind of incentivization system. However, if somebody's like, I know, but you don't understand, my team's different, or I know I need it, which is fine too. What are some metrics people really do need to start thinking about before they do it? Because I've seen people jump in when they're not in a healthy state from a financial point either.
Well, I think, I'll qualify what I said earlier. I'm not against them. I just think the word incentive needs to be defined ahead of time. Kind of going back to your question just a second ago, why we're doing it in the first place, what are we trying to solve, and the type of incentive involved. I'm against structured bonuses that, as Addison alluded to earlier, that don't take into consideration things that actually are going to be either beneficial to the practice or could cause a detriment. So I just wanted to qualify that. So defining what the incentive is, I like individual basis personally, based on merit, based on value they provide, and something that means something to them. As we've all seen in the past, money can motivate one person, but can mean completely, is meaningless to the next. And that sometimes that can cause a little rub because it's not valued for them. They don't feel valued. So that's one thing to consider. But going back to your original question of what to look for before you get into any type of incentive structure, first of all, be aware of what your numbers are. Awareness is always a first step with anything. I like to see, if it's a single doc practice, at the very least having 60% overhead, how we qualify it is all expenses outside of what the doctor income is. At least that. Payroll, hopefully that's at least under 30% as well. If it's over that marker, start understanding why. Is your fixed cost too high? If your fixed cost is driving your overhead, you're only going to multiply the problem because now you're adding more fixed costs to a practice that isn't used to sustaining that type of increase in payroll. If it's variable cost and your spending habits are off, maybe plug the holes in the bucket first. But again, understanding where you're at. If you have an associate, that changes the game a little bit because obviously what Addison was saying, that's a hit on your profitability. I love associates, but when you have them in a situation like this, I'd say overhead has to be, ideally 50%, but I'd certainly under 55 because again, we have to make room for that associate. So yeah, those are some of the numbers I like to look at. And the opportunities to drive down overhead. One little sidebar, I find it really interesting. I've had the pleasure of working with multiple industries over my years. And for whatever reason, some medical and dentistry, they have this need to put these structured bonuses in place. All the rest of the corporate structures and everything are all based on individual performance. So it's just interesting to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think you bring up some good, points and numbers, and I think that's maybe one thing we skipped over is that the numbers are so important. And it's also important to look at the right numbers to make sure we're measuring the right things with accuracy. I've seen it where people are measuring off of, gross production versus net production. Well, like gross production, I don't care what you charge for a denture, but if you're only able to collect $700 for it, that's the real number. So, I mean, looking at the correct numbers, and also having clarity around what those numbers mean, both for your practice and the success of your practice, but also like you can't create a bonus structure around a super complex system where, it takes a calculus degree to figure out what my bonus is going to be at the end of the month. So they like the team members, the people affected by it, if you're looking to drive some sort of performance, either individual or team, they need to be able to see a super direct correlation between actions and outcomes and have a clarity on what that means, in terms of, if I do X, this leads to Y. And which you're right, though, Jake. You point out the fact not everybody's motivated by money. And so sometimes having the freedom in a bonus structured plan to be able to, divvy out those resources in a different direction or a different way might be very useful.
Yeah. And I think there's so much around metrics that we really could dive into. Hence, I do want to, because I think so much, like I said, we go ahead and jump into, we'll talk about different plans here in a bit. Well, we jump into them before we even recognize overhead. But even on net production, I'm like, net production is still the number to go off of in the sense of that's what actually was truly produced. But I say, what was your collection rate in the last several months? Is it consistently? Because I've seen people who have incredible net production, but their collection rate is around 90%. That's right there. That may be the bonus amount that, you're looking to give. So really, we can't bonus people off of that which we don't collect. And I think you guys were starting to kind of get into, in my opinion, what is individual almost incentivization versus the meritocracy of one for all and all for one, or a team. And that can lead to two different metrics that are needed as well. Because if you're going to bonus people individually based on their KPIs, they may be able to bring enough value to actually support that bonus. Whereas if you're doing the meritocracy, just one, all for, or well, you know what I'm trying to say. If it's the whole everybody, I get words mixed up, but you know what I'm trying to say. If it's that whole sense of everybody is going to win when then you have to recognize some people may pull more weight than others. And that may be something you've got to factor in with metrics as well. Ashley, what do you see when it comes to the metrics? Before we start talking about cultural, we were going to dive into that anyway, but anything else around that with metrics, people, positions? Like I said,
I mean, we have the guy, the by the numbers guy and the numbers guy here. So I mean, they pretty much hit it on the head. They've covered basically what I would have touched on.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying is you have to know your numbers, period. You have to know exactly what percentage you have. I am also, and this was kind of an interesting, really fun conversation on DSN in regards to this of, you also, for me, I need to know where the people's debt services are. I think it's super important to, yes, profitability is amazing, but if a huge chunk of that has to go to debt services, then we've got to be thoughtful in my mind. Do you really want to bonus off of profit or do you want to bonus off of available funds? Because we're going to have to pay that debt. We have to. They will keep sending the letters to us of paying our debt. So in my mind, being thoughtful of, do we give the bonus before we pay the debt? Because is that healthy for the team if we're doing that? So I do want to kind of spend the next bit of time discussing some of the systems that we've seen. What are the pros and cons to them? And, one of them I'm actually going to start with, just because Addison, you alluded to it, do we want to give the separate bonuses for the hygienist versus a TC versus a DA? What about a hygiene sterile tech? Do we want to actually bonus people based on the position that they're holding and the value that they're bringing? And is it different? I'll let you start, Addison.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my mind, I like the whole team bonuses more than individual positions. In the past, I've done individual positional bonuses. Thankfully, it was 10 years ago, and I got my teeth knocked out early in my practice career in that regard. So I learned, and what I learned through that experience was that when you give anybody a reason to silo themselves within the practice and that you start having divides between different members of the team, it just generally leads to culture issues. And, they say, well, this person is acting this way because they get bonused on this, or that person's not going to do that because they say that's not my job and because they don't get bonused on it. So for me, I tend to lean more towards team-wide bonuses because you don't want competing incentives. You want everybody rowing on the same, path and going down the same direction. But also because there's enough separation in the teams that I don't want to feed into that. So
Yeah,
that's my thoughts on that.
absolutely. Ashley, what about you?
Yeah, I can only mirror that. Like Jake mentioned, we've been with the Dental Success World since its inception, but through that time, was with Mark Costas in many dental offices, and we've tried many things, and did try, the separate bonuses at one time, and all I can say is it did not end well. And so
Yeah, yeah,
definitely wouldn't do that again.
yeah. Jake, same thing, I'm assuming, or
I have a little different approach. Team-wide bonuses, I think you have to be careful with. Obviously, Addison, you have some magic sauce with yours, but I've seen them done very badly in the past, very poorly, where they're not tied to the right things. But also, you kind of brought this up earlier, Summer. If they're team-wide and others are contributing more, that can cause just as much dissension as the siloed, concept, from what I've seen anyway. So again, going back to the definition of incentive, um, I like to use more of a tiered approach, a tiered model where as they provide more value, I know a lot of the docs use this, they provide more value. There's a ladder they can climb that as they learn more skills, provide more value to the practice, they know exactly how that works and how they can make more money hourly. Now that's I guess that's separate because the incentive can come from what means something to them. And I think finding out about what or how they feel valued makes a lot of sense. So if you find out that one of your DAs, really loves time off with their family, you can incentivize her directly with a day off or a surprise, paid vacation or some version of that. Or, so I like that approach better personally. The tiered model, so they have a blueprint to make more money and everything's spelled out. A lot of times these bonus structures, unless you're Addison, they can get a little ambiguous. And when people get lost in that, it causes all kinds of um, not so fun feelings. So it can backfire very quickly. So that's my 2 cents.
yeah. Well, and I think truly, I think really that magic sauce is the culture and cohesiveness that you have. And if we have that, I think it makes so much rowing towards the same thing easier. What happens is if there's already people on there that aren't pulling their weight, this isn't going to magically necessarily pull them up. Now, it may actually help with the peer-to-peer accountability, but it can also lead to, all sorts of different things in an office. My feeling is I have also done the whole, if a TC's percentage of acceptance is blank, they get blank. I've done all of that. For hygiene reactivation, you get blank for every whatever. And it got super complicated. And somehow Debbie and I became responsible for tracking it all. And that became a nightmare and arguing. And much to your point, Addison, I don't know if I got my teeth knocked out, but I definitely got something like knocked because it didn't go well for me either. And so I think I understand probably conceptually better the sense of a team approach, but I do think you have to have so much of the culture that would be there. So on that note, if we all have kind of various levels of understanding how like a team bonus would work, Addison, go a little bit deeper into what does it look like for you and does it, and how did you make it work?
So yeah, and I haven't instituted any in my startup yet. The nature, like, granted, it's not seemingly a startup anymore. We're 5 years in, but I never felt like the numbers could like naturalize yet to figure out like what should I be measuring on. And so, but back in the old days, I did the team-wide bonus system where if we got 1%, well, if we got to 55% overhead, that basically 1% of the collections of the month was then distributed out the next month as a team-wide bonus. We got to 50%, then it was 2%. And that is a team-wide bonus. I think we distributed it based upon hours worked, on a neutral basis. So it wasn't like hygienists got more because they had a higher hourly pay. I think it was distributed upon hours worked. And it, you know, it wasn't a huge bonus, but it was something. Um, and I would also say that that's team-wide bonuses. That does not necessarily mean you can't still add on individual targets and just say, hey, treatment coordinator, if you hit this percentage, I'm going to give you a $50 gift card to go have a nice dinner with your spouse or something. It doesn't preclude you from doing any other on top of that. Or, like Jake was alluding to with the tiered payment systems, like I think that's still an extremely good overall compensation, pathway that drives, if you want people to learn more skills and become better at their job, there's nothing better than that stair step model of, hey, as you add on more skills, you move up the pay scale. So I think that's a great way. But the 1 to 2% of collections, and then I mean, you could even take it further. If they get to 45% overhead, then you give them 3%. So I mean, you could always do some of those things. Which, okay, so then if you're at 45%, you're giving out 3% back to the team, then essentially that means you're at 48% overhead.
Mhm.
Um, you know, if you're okay with that and it leads to good teamwork, holding each other accountable and good outcomes, then that's a good plan. You might also, I mean, be able to do it without those bonus structures, but at the time it worked well for me.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, I did the exact same one, when I first joined DSI, and that was a model that was really successful, I think, for some people originally. I think we all saw, though, that there was pitfalls that could definitely come up with that in the sense that, once again, either people not pulling their weight, or what happens if you get close but just not quite there, or how do you share overhead and how do they know what overhead is? How far do I share that and how impacted can people be on certain things? And so, I think that's some of maybe what we saw could get in the way of that structure. But I use the same structure, and some people really can consistently do it successful. I remember one doctor saying, well, if my team's understanding that I have 45% overhead, all they're thinking is, holy smokes, how much is this doctor making? And I thought to myself, you're right. There is that sense of how much transparency do you want to share around it if it's based on overhead. However, if it's done and you can do it well, it can make sense financially to base it off of things like that. A lot of times, once again, the leaders of the organization with a bonus structure of that nature may say, we're pulling a little bit more weight, we're taking on more, of the managerial roles. Do they, if you take that 1 or 2%, do you actually, potentially move, say, 30% to the leadership team and divide it out amongst them? The 70% is distributed amongst the rest of the team just based on duties and value brought. I've actually heard that is sometimes what people will do is, the people who are in management really do have quite a bit more weight on their shoulders, dividing it amongst them, something like that. I don't know if you guys have heard of anything else beyond that being a structure with the 1 to 2% based on overhead, dividing it out maybe slightly unequally of management versus regular team members. Anyone? Ashley, Jake?
I mean, I've heard of some, but I don't think they're worth mentioning because it's based on just straight collection or straight production. So, I mean, that was a structure that, we followed in DSI, as you mentioned, Summer. And the one thing I saw was the team wasn't sure on how they had control over overhead. They didn't, as you mentioned, they didn't know what it was. And if they did, they weren't sure how they could influence it. So if you are going to do this, I would say if you want to go the structured route, make sure you're presented to them in the way that they understand that they control supplies, they hit their benchmarks with KPIs. Because again, we're influencing both sides of the coin. There's variable cost, there's fixed cost. So they can control supplies, follow the labs that you guys have approved, office supplies, usage, all these things. And then, of course, hitting the different benchmarks, keeping collections at a certain percent, collecting over the counter, hitting hygiene, hitting their numbers, and the list goes on. If they can influence both levers, then you might have a chance. But they have to understand how that actually works, because that's where either that happens, or what I've seen with this is that the numbers, because that bonus number becomes either not enough, or it doesn't happen at all. Both can be equally as demotivating.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I've seen, is people getting super, super close and then having to look at their team and being like, sorry that we were 1,000 off. You should have pushed it harder. You're not getting the bonus this month. And I know I got caught up. I don't know if you did, Addison, 10 years ago, but I got caught in some of those situations. And it was really difficult to have to look at them and be like, but we didn't actually hit it. What do I do? Do I start to let it slide or not? And those are just some things to think about. But, I do want to say one thing, and I found like COVID was actually a kind of lovely reset for me, because I got to rethink all of this. And I don't know, for those of you who read the book Drive, I think it was Daniel Pink, it really talks so much about internal motivation and how do we tap more into that than using incentives constantly. And the incentives, what I loved about that book is incentives actually can become demotivating really quickly. And so the thing that I remember taking from that book that I implemented so strongly during COVID was I got rid of all bonus structures, and I let the team know why. And it was easy to understand at that time. And what I did is actually, as we all got back into the flow, was I really ensured like their first basic need was to feel really good about what they were making on an hourly basis based on the value they brought, for sure. And we implemented the tier system. And for people who don't know what that means, I think all of us, you really do make more based on how you go up the growth ladder. And it made it to where it was so transparent and people could earn more money at the speed that made sense for them. But there was always a growth strategy in place. They could always bring more value and earn the money that they were bringing. And when they felt paid well with a growth strategy put in front of them, what I found is that attracted more of the right people, and it kept the right people who they actually felt motivated by the confidence that they got in the value that they brought. So they just became so much more confident. And I always joke that if I'm going to be the hero in a story, I know that at some point that means I'll be the villain. So I try to stay out of either territory, I joke. And instead, I so borrow Alistair's phraseology of like, can I truly just be the lighthouse of here's what's possible in your role? How do I make you feel safe and appreciated and truly cared about and seen? A really good wage that is so fair, even slightly maybe above what other people are paying, but not exorbitant. So make you feel appreciated where you are now. And here's a strategy for you to gain confidence, value, and skill set that I'm going to put in front of you. And I'll walk beside you while you do it, but it's yours to do. And that's super awesome. So I found since COVID, I so moved into that kind of world. And it's made it to where I think that sense of needing bonuses all the time, we just haven't even talked about it since then, to be completely honest. And it's more fun to watch them grow in skill set and confidence, feel like they earned it. They're the heroes of their story, not me. And much to Jake's point, I definitely developed more of a sense of what matters to that person. And, I joke, like, it was really fun to gift somebody a whole thing of car washes. Because she was a busy mom and she was like, this is amazing. Or, I really did give somebody a week's worth of meals prepared, and the chef brought them to her house. And it was like the world changed for her just because she knew that that's something that she just loved so much. And I think there's so many of us as coaches who, I know Slifka does it, Addison, I know there's so many coaches who do things of this nature. And I know for me, I found the combination of meeting their needs, giving them a sense of confidence and growth, and then really seeing them for who they were and surprising them when they did something incredible with that. Like, to borrow Alistair, isn't it like that sense of surprise and delight and such a sense of, I know you and I know how much you'll love this? That kind of combination is what, to Jake's point, I think helps to create our stickiness without the bonus structure. Addison, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking to, if someone wants to dig deeper into that, if you're thinking of, okay, how can I want to spend some money to show, my team some love or get them to work harder. I think you go back to the five languages of appreciation in the workplace to know whether, are they motivated by quality time or physical touch, which I wouldn't recommend, or, the other languages of appreciation, acts of service, that sort of thing. So what you were showing though, it can be incredibly like thrifty and cheap to actually, yeah, buy, here's a year worth of car washes. Here you go. It's $300 maybe, like insanely cheap, to give unlimited car washes to a busy parent. That's a great, gift that doesn't cost much, and you could tie it to, you could say, hey, you know what? I really like, this is my goal for you in the next month. And also base it around more of an individual level. So I think like what in the book Drive, they talk about purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And so if you give them those three things and help them find their purpose of, hey, I need you to really help drive treatment acceptance rates. And I need you to help these people, these patients, find a way to pay for this treatment by using more care credit or Sunbit or Proceed Finance. And then give them the tools that they need and set them a goal and say, I got some really cool things in store for you if you can hit this goal, and then surprise them. And I think that, that's individual. You can use things a lot more sparingly and it's a lot simpler. You can also surprise the entire team and say, hey, we hit our collections goal last month. We're all going to go on a group bike ride to some breweries around the area or something. I think that can be really great, and especially because a lot of times they want quality time with each other, not necessarily you or anything, but you can do something for them that is kind of incredibly cheap when you think about it, and they get to have fun, and it drives. Like I also go back to when you think of the ideal team player from Patrick Lencioni, humble, hungry, and smart, they have to be hungry for doing better at their job. And if you have someone that doesn't match those qualities, no incentive, no bonus, nothing is going to do well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's what I mean. Throwing money at that is not going to make somebody, rise up to the standard that you're looking for sure. So, Ashley, what about you? As we're talking about bonus structures, some of the things I know that I implement, obviously Addison's implemented. What do you see as far as to doctors you're talking to that have worked and things like that?
Yeah, I think I can just add on exactly what you guys are saying, those examples too. Sometimes like just additional time off is a great bonus, and that's relatively cheap. Dr. Aaron Nicholas also just did a post the other day about because some people's love language is oh my gosh, it's mine and I forgot it. It's when somebody tells you like good job, that's what it is.
Affirmations, yeah.
Public
Affirmations. Thank you. Like just like acknowledging when your team is doing good, that's that just little piece of building culture. And Aaron I did this post about how he was frustrated that his team was asking for this, and his consultant at that time was like, they could have asked you for a trip to Hawaii. They just want to hear thank you, like this is relatively cheap, dude. Like just start saying thank you.
Yeah.
So, I love the getting to know kind of each member of your team and communicating with them in the way that they receive it as well. And that's, dependent on that person. And there's lots of PC and good ways to do that without.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think too, I understand when some people say, well, gosh, what happens when you start to get 15, 20, 30? How do you really keep track of that? Like I have so many things. And I tell people, I can't sit here and say that I know all 30 whatever people, you know, absolutely everything, but it takes very little. And there are, forms that we have every new team member fill out. And of course, as far as like their favorite things and candy and coffee drink and all of those things. So it does make it easier. Even my remote admin team, I found out a lot of the things that they love. And I can still even remotely send a few things that I just know that they know that at least I took the time to think about something that matters to them. So I don't think you have to, know the whole life story or, really dig deep into everyone, but you can get some baseline information when they are hired to keep somewhere. And so, whether it's your admin assistant or you can find ways to celebrate them based on whatever specifically they did and what matters to them. And on that note, like Ashley was saying, sometimes it's just the words and affirmation that go so far. And like sometimes we'll throw money at something that I think Addison was alluding to this potentially in the beginning. It's like it really is the wrong prescription almost. The symptoms are they want to be seen, heard, acknowledged, recognized, appreciated. And that doesn't necessarily take money. It just takes time. And, everybody knows I love little notes and lockers. I love notes. Like for me, that's just such a big deal. And even if it's just a few words of, I saw you do this, and I want you to know that mattered. And I love it to be specific so they know I actually saw it. But I think the love languages, I think that can be super helpful. And I really think all of us are kind of saying the same thing, which is bonus structures can be great, but ensure that the foundation of metrics, culture, knowing your people, caring about what they care for, like seeing how healthy of a environment you have is really first and foremost. I also want to kind of tack on to that. If you think you want to potentially do a bonus structure, the one thing that I tell people is I would set the precedent of we're going to try this for 90 days. And I want you to know this is an experiment for 90 days. And it may work and it may not. So I want everybody to be able to hold it loosely because I just want to try something out and see how it goes and start small. To Addison's point, I was surprised sometimes when a pedicure was huge or a car wash or whatever. But I think potentially having the 90 days versus saying indefinitely can make a big difference. Ashley, what else around this topic do you have to add in?
Well, we did have a couple of questions in the chat. Would now be a good time, or do you want to save those to the end?
Please. Unless Addison, Jake, did you have anything to tack on to kind of what I just said?
I think I'll add, Addison, go ahead, buddy.
No, yeah, you covered everything that I was thinking.
One thing I like maybe to add, as you guys know, I try my best to bridge the gap between numbers and people. I love to do that. But if you strip this down to the human element here or the human condition, I think what we're trying to do is create a safe space for them, right? And so if you understand kind of how they are, what they value, you can use that in a good way to make them feel that safety, because nobody wants to do a bad job and everybody wants to feel safe in their environment. Everybody wants to provide value to the practice, to what they're a part of. So again, if you have that in mind and the bonus structure, whatever that is, supports that, I'd say go for it.
And Ashley, go ahead. What were the questions?
Oh, I love that, Jake. Thank you for that. So Rachel said, when you say tiers, are you speaking, for example, that a hygienist gets certified to give anesthesia and that pushes them up in the different pay tier? That's just an example. I've definitely seen the downside of hygiene commission in the industry culture right now. I love the tier structure and surprising the teams. How many practice owners actually take the time to do that?
I'll kind of take that. I did have one of my hygienists recently say, well, I'm doing more laser therapy, is that production getting counted towards me? And I said, you know what? It's great that you're doing it. And yes, now that you've been doing it routinely for a while, I'm going to make a pay adjustment up to the next highest level. But I kind of made the point of you shouldn't worry routinely about your production of like, well, do I get credit for that, or is that going towards? I just say I'm worried more about overall patient experience and making sure you're doing the best service for your patients. Now, I think we have lots of resources on DSN. The high, tier structure, like 1, 2, and 3. If you're a beginning hygienist and yeah, maybe you don't do local anesthesia or not laser trained. I know other, I actually have one of my hygienists who does orthodontic, like bonding wires on for me and removing attachments and removing brackets. She's the highest one. And similar for like assistants, you have the beginning assistants, and then they can move up as they gain skill levels. Maybe they can scan really well. Maybe they can design your 3D crowns on CEREC or Glidewell. Different levels like that. I think on DSN we have lots of examples of different tier structures people have made for every job position. Summer, do you use the tier structure in your offices?
I do. I do. And actually, what's funny is I think some are still around there that are from like circa, I don't even know how long ago. And I tell people some of them saw the dollar per hour for some positions and were freaking out. And I was like, don't stress. You can make it whatever it needs to be based on. I'm like, delete that part. But what I tell people is, the nice thing about the tier system is it's a built-in growth ladder. It's transparent. So whenever there becomes this sense of, well, so-and-so's making so-and-so, I assume people are talking. I actually don't sit here and try to tell people, don't tell anybody. That just never goes well, in my opinion. So I want it as transparent as possible. If hygienist A is making 55, I want her to know exactly why she's making 55, or hygienist B is making 52. And so these tiers, what I love is, to your point, tier 1 is for me within 90 days, like from a standard of care position, what is the baseline stuff that needs to be done? And that doesn't mean like it's an okay job. It means like from the standard of care from your office, what do they need to do when it comes to charting, perio percentages, whatever it may be, what's the standard of care? That's level 1. But to that person who is asking, yeah, level 2 might be they get their anesthesia. In Colorado, they will always come out with that. But I think so much you can build on to the levels based on the skills they're bringing. And I think to myself, what are the skills that directly correlate to them having better impact on the patient, which means higher dollar per appointment an hour? Because usually a higher impact on the patient just brings a higher dollar per hour. So I say to myself, what if that's actually co-diagnosing, or whatever word you want to say, co-creating with a treatment plan with a patient, or helping to discuss some of the bigger, more advanced cases. That for me is a higher tiered, say, hygienist. And to your point, Addison, that is a way that definitely my hygienist can make more money, is getting better at discussing treatment. And so I think that's kind of that built-in way that people can be incentivized. It's internally motivated. They grow at the point that makes sense for them. And that could be a whole separate webinar that we could have, I think. But hopefully that answers that question. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
Yeah, if we're talking hygiene specifically, one thing maybe if you're looking to do this, before you start this, you kind of brought this up earlier somewhere about the pay ranges. This goes for any position, I guess. Look to your area to see what the going rate is and how you stay competitive with that. You can use that as your barometer to kind of set these thresholds. But also you can create a tier within the tier, meaning if it's tier 1, you can have let's say it's a hygienist, it's tier 1, it's between 40 and 43. If the hygienist is doing 80% of tier 1, maybe you can place her somewhere in that tier, and then there's more ascension to be had. So there's some of that, a little bit of play. And also I like to set, we all know the metric, at least most of us do, 3.3 times pay, which that's when the hygienist becomes a true profit center. That's another webinar. But I like to use that maybe at the top of the tier, so that because at some point they have to be capped out at some point. This can't go on forever. So if they reach that level of, say, tier 4 or whatever, and they're tapped out, they're the highest paid hygienist in the land, then maybe they qualify for a bonus plan, but it's more so directly tied to their production versus pay, which again, that's individual basis. and they know that if they make more money, that the bonus, the goal is going to increase along with that. So it's a way to, I guess, keep the incentive going while utilizing their own production. So that's hygiene specifically. But what I will say is, with all these tiers out there, I can't have. I encourage all the people I work with to do this. You can use some sort of structure and framework, but create your own experience with it. Meaning, take all of your hygienists out of the equation currently. Take everything out of the equation and say, what is the ideal hygienist? Because if you take in consideration your current hygiene team, or someone who's maybe coming on board, that may set limitations or what have you. So take all that out of the equation, and this goes for any position. Take all that equation, set it for the ideal person, and then place them into that working document versus the other way around.
Right. Sometimes you can actually see the hygienist that you have and create it for them versus saying, no, what do I want as my baseline standard of care, and then build up from there. Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think, to just kind of put it all together, I see a question real quick, but to put it all together, I think what we've all decided is there's not a right or wrong, but there are lots of things to think about prior to actually doing it. Sustainability, metrics to really think about ahead of time. Do you want it whole team versus individual? Do you want to maybe make it more of a 90-day trial period to see? And really, what are we starting with? Is it the right prescription for what's going on? Because I think we've all discussed that a lot of times, if people feel appreciated, safe, they feel like they're already well compensated, they're not necessarily going to go find that somewhere else. And I think we can all attest, sometimes just knowing them as people, surprising them with what matters to them, not money always, can sometimes be just the incentivization that it keeps people sticky. And you guys know, I have no idea why Debbie keeps hanging out with me, but I think it might be because of those reasons. I'm like, she's just a gem, and I'm like, she still is hanging around. So
yeah.
But I have to echo Jake there. Yeah.
I'm really blessed. I am truly blessed, for sure.
Summer, or Ashley and Summer, I could take that question if you like, but from Colton real fast.
Yeah, and I didn't actually, I couldn't read it quick enough, but yeah, what was the question?
So how do you, Ashley, I'll let you, I'm sorry, this is your webinar.
No worries, by all means, Jacob. How do you tell staff that you're stopping with the previously implemented bonus system moving forward? Jake, would you like to take this question?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Thank you. So Colton, I know you, buddy. What's up? What I usually suggest, and I think, Addison, you and I have spoken about this at Masterminds, I believe. Usually suggest is looking at the previous year and looking at what they made hours wise when you consider the bonus to unravel this. And if you're looking to eradicate or dismantle the current structure, you can basically raise them to that hourly bonus or hourly rate, because the practice is used to paying that already. But as you present this, you make it so they feel like there's something given to them, not taken away. So you show them this is your hourly rate, you raise them to that level. And then if you're looking to start the tiered structure, you can implement that and show them, based on your hourly rate, you're already in tier 2. Let's get you caught up with these skill sets, and then you can go on to the next tier if that's the approach you want to take. Or if it's more of an individual incentive, you can explain to them what's going on. So yeah, that'd be my suggestion as far as how to eliminate it. Just bring them to what you're used to paying them and show them. And again, it's the whole concept of, I'm giving you something, not taking it away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And be humble about it. Just, you know what, this is too complicated. It's too, stressful for you to worry about whether you're going to get it this month or not. And sometimes that can have a serious impact on your family. So you know what? I'm going to give you this as your regular hourly wage. And then you dangle the carrot out in front of them and say, and this is where you're at now, but I'm not going to wait another year to give you another raise. If you step up the tiers, you will earn this, then you'll earn that, and move up. And be humble, apologize. If you did use a system that was too complex, too confusing, just eat it and say, you know what, I screwed up. And it's better to have a leader that is humble and just says they screwed up than to try to smooth talk your way through it.
That is such a great point. The humility goes so far, and it's a very simple, just because it's simple. Doesn't mean it's not difficult, but it's a very simple thing that goes a really long way with teams sometimes.
And what's funny is I think teams trust you more. Don't you guys all
Yes.
agree? When actually I just had to stand up and be like, golly, you guys, my heart was in the right place. My math skills were obviously in the wrong place. And I am sorry for that. And to your point, Addison, truly, if it's complex, for me, I know how complex it is for you and that may affect your family. I love that. I think that is such, like you said, such a humble way of just saying, and this is why I'm going to make sure you're fully taken care of and give you a way to continue to grow and make it much more clear and specific to you and your position. So thank you guys for that. I think that's really, really helpful. And, like I said, I tried to kind of wrap up the pros and cons of doing bonuses and incentives. What teams will it make sense for? When does it not make sense from a metric and culture standpoint? What are the alternatives to it? Any last remarks, before we say goodbye? Anyone? Let's see, Addison, because you're right there for me.
No, just yeah, this is definitely a complex topic. I think we addressed kind of all the ins and outs of it. But definitely if you folks have questions about it, reach out to us or shoot us a message on DSN, and I'm sure any of us would love to help you dig through it.
For sure. Jake, anything?
Not really. I just think it's really cool that you and Ashley have these continual concepts each month, and they're so valuable. So thank you for allowing me to be part of it. It's really, yeah, you guys are so consistent. Like people will start these things and they slowly fade off. You guys are like a train.
On like 2 solid years now. I'm pretty
I
proud.
know. It's awesome.
I think it's been more. I think it's been like 2.5 years, Ash.
Nice.
We've just created more of an agenda year ahead. So
anyway, good job on you guys.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you, Jake.
Yes. Thank you,
Ashley,
Jake.
what about you?
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention there's questions in here too about where to find different, examples of these tier structures. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but again, I mean, not that it's a pitch for DSN, but we obviously love DSN. So join DSN if you're not a member. And yeah, there's all kinds of examples floating around in there, or people open to have these conversations constantly. So yeah, visit dentalsuccessnetwork.com in our document library, there's some examples of these tier systems as well.
Well, and I think too, sometimes people go immediately to what are the resources already available. And I'm like, don't forget, somebody made these up in their head, myself included. You can do it. It really is just saying to yourself, set out what are the 12 or 15 things that within, say, a baseline standard of care, what do you want for a DA? What do you want for a hygienist? And honestly, in my very humble opinion, it usually turns out better anyway when you're actually thinking it through for you, your office, and your people. So there are resources available. Please, we want people to use them, but create truly your own experience. Create what's going to make sense for you. And I think sometimes if we can just sit down and start compiling the list, we'll be surprised just how well we know exactly what we want for, say, a tier 1 type assistant versus, say, a more experienced assistant.
Love that. Good point too. Awesome.
All right, everybody. I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for taking your time to do this. I always appreciate having our guests on, and we will see you guys next month, where we will be talking about, what are we talking about?
We'll have our executive director of DSN, Sydney Robinson, joining us for discussions around team training and resources for that.
Beautiful. Yes, that is what it is. Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much. Super appreciate it.
See you later.
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.